Now we'll move to today's PowerPoint, and I'll make it big. So we were just talking about the last week's question from Shigeko on, and I think maybe Irene, on cousin marriage. And if you didn't get this, it's very interesting. Another term, the anthropological term, I guess, is consanguinity, and it's quite high. And the worst is the first cousins in terms of the genetic roll of the dice. And so most of that is first cousins. And that results in around a third of all the congenital anomalies in Afghanistan. And there's a confirmatory study of Pakistani couples who also have the same folkways with marrying cousins, and they found pretty much the same thing. So that was just a review of last week's question. Then there's just some up-to-date hot takes in what's in the news. Apparently the Pashtun Taliban is mistreating the Uzbeks and the Turkmens, interceding for Pashtuns, local Pashtuns, recapturing land, settling scores, feuds, whatever. The same is happening with the Hazaras, who you'll remember are a mix of Turks and Mongols. And then this is another little sidelight story that the Hazaras, lacking their own legal code, often borrow the one from the Pashtuns. I thought that was fascinating. Just today, I was told about this interview that the article by Kathy Gannon, and you can Google it if you want, was very upbeat that the Taliban wants to integrate and be acceptable and obviously receive aid. And you know, this is the message of a book I just finished called The Afghanistan Papers, which is like the Pentagon Papers that were about Vietnam, but about Afghanistan. And one of their critiques, one of the mistakes is that after 9/11 and we went in and took control of Afghanistan, the main thing we should have done at that point was try to bring the Taliban back in. You know, we had the same argument in Iraq with the Sunnis. We should, after conquering Saddam Hussein, we should have negotiated with the Ba'athist party, his party. So just a few updates. Now, I just want to, we left off last week with the royal family. Some bad things start happening to them. Let's just review when it started. It started with internal bickering. A cousin of King Zahir finally decided, you know, cousin, I can't work with you anymore. I don't want to be prime minister. And he quits. That puts pressure on the king, who stays on the throne. And so he does cede some ground and becomes like a constitutional figurehead and gives their parliament more of a say without his brother participating. So he made a concession, the king. And you'll remember how they're related. We won't spend time here, but Zahir's down here, here's Daoud. And they're all ultimately related to Dust Mohammed. You remember that. But in 1973, Daoud has watched his cousin as a constitutional monarch, and he doesn't think he's gone far enough, fast enough. He's a modernist and a little more of a lefty in terms of reform. And so he orchestrates a palace coup and throws out his cousin, becomes the new prime minister and president of the new Islamic Republic. That's Daoud. Maybe he was well motivated. He accused his cousin of neglecting the possibilities for creating Pashtunistan, infiltrating into where the Pashtuns live in Pakistan. He was more aggressive about that. Bhutto, who we're going to meet in just a second, had just sacked nationalists that were part of governments in Pakistan. They were quiet, peaceful folks advocating for Pashtun autonomy and Baluch autonomy. And Bhutto had had enough of them, and we'll get more detail when we tell Bhutto's story. And the Awami Party we introduced last time, it was the party that grew up in Pashtunistan part of Pakistan. So they were nationalist and socialist. Nationalist and socialist. And that's the combination that is going to be fatal and are full of fate as we tell the story of Pakistan. And the Baluchs were even more, they were almost Marxists. So Daoud, just a review, he was autocratic, but he was progressive, but not too progressive. He purged the communists. He said, look, we're going to reform, but we're not going to go that far. Nevertheless, so he displeased the communists, and his progressive ideas displeased the religious conservatives. And the liberals who had become used to working in a constitutional monarchy under Zahir, with this autocratic rule of his cousin, they became restless too. And of course, because he purged the communists, the Soviets, which are looming in the north, looking down at what's going on, get nervous because he's got some NATO advisors in northern Afghanistan, and Daoud says, you know what, I'm going to be also close to the Saudi Arabia because they both got oil, and the Russians are looking at that, and they're not happy with their position. So this is part of the great game, the Cold War edition. And I'm just sort of restating what I said before. Daoud had been convinced that he could cause mischief among the Pashtuns in Pakistan. The Russians came down finally, and they met with Daoud, Brezhnev. And Brezhnev issued an ultimatum about the NATO advisors that were in northern Afghanistan. And observers said that Daoud stood up to him with bravery and patriotism, that Afghanistan would remain free, and the Soviets could take a hike. So the word was given, the first of two interventions in Afghanistan politics, big time, the first of two assassinations. Brezhnev gave the green light for the Afghani communists to assassinate Daoud and institute a Soviet that presumably at some point might join and become a state of the Soviet Union. There had been other assassinations going on, so some of this was payback on both sides. So this is the a day after the coup, as you'll remember, and the communists were ruthless. They not only did they assassinate Daoud, but also members of his family. They were ruthless. Some members of that royal family survived, though, and are prominent now in Afghani affairs, including this feminist. We've ended here with Amin. I told you that he went to the University of Wisconsin. If you've been there, it's you've got a wonderful leftist history. Collective politics, and he took over. It took him a year, but he emerged as the supreme leader, as he called himself. But he was only supreme leader for 3 months because once again, the Russians weren't pleased with how Amin was governing. He was a Pashtun, a Gilzai. A lot of prominent leaders are Pashtun from the Gilzai party. And he was ruthless. He seized all of the royalist property, jailed those that had survived the coup, put them in jail. He exiled the king and didn't kill him, but he exiled him because he had been popular. But there was a list of a lot of people who were scheduled to be executed. There was one minor grandson of one of the original emirs who escaped disguised as a hippie. I thought that was hilarious. The main thing, though, was the overreach. He tried to undo Pashtun tribal structure. And anybody that comes into Pashtunistan and tries to do that is asking for trouble. We've seen that over and over again, especially with activists coming north from India, dabbling in Pashtun tribal politics. And the executions, but there was one disastrous symbolic move that involved the national flag. This had been the royal flag. Well, I think this is the flag of the republic, and this is the flag of the republic, and this is the flag that the Communist Party decided to hoist up, which unfortunately was fairly similar to the Russian flag. And so, and by the way, this is the flag that the American occupation approved of in 2001. Flash forward.
Did somebody try to get in, Johnny?
What's that?
Is somebody trying to get in?
I think they got in.
Oh, okay.
This is the flag of the Taliban. You'll know that they're not big on images, and I suspect this is something from the Quran. It doesn't excite me. anyway, there have been 25 Afghani flags since the Hotak dynasty in 1709, and that's a world record. So the implementation of the agricultural policy was terrible. The confiscation of land did not go well. The food production plummeted. We saw this a little bit with this, the Russian Revolution, particularly in the Ukraine, as Irene has talked about. This was what was called by critics the first organized nationwide repression ever. Nobody had ever had enough power, could project power from Kabul to the rest of the country. But here was a government that was trying to do just that. One good thing, I'll pause and give you, take a deep breath and give you something nice. He did declare equality of the sexes as the communists had. And this was the Afghani communist female leader. She was a doctor. She was named deputy head of state, and she made this very enlightened statement on the role of women in society that we would all agree with. So the fall of Amin, he ruled for 3 months, but here was the step that did him in. He decided to assassinate a fellow communist who had been a rival, Taraki, who was also Pashtun. And then after that, there were so many desertions from the army that he was losing his police power. Out of desperation, he tried to make nice with Pakistan because they were—
I can mute that. I can hear that. I'm not getting this.
They were causing trouble along the Durand line when the communists took over. That Pakistan was not at all pleased. Finally, the Soviet Union once again looked down on what's going on and who's in charge. And if they don't order the assassination of Amin, they don't do anything to stop it. And so Amin is assassinated, and that kicks off the 10-year Soviet-Afghan war. And off we go. The Soviets installed Karmal. He interesting background. He was originally Kashmiri. He's not Pashtun, but he had been Tajikicized, and which I guess means that the Kashmiris immigrated to the Tajik part of Afghanistan. And he had been in Amin's target also, and he knew, and he fled to Czechoslovakia, which was, of course, communist at that time. But after Amin was assassinated, Russia gave the green light for him to return from the forests of Czechoslovakia. He didn't even want to live in Prague. He feared Amin's ruthlessness so much. So I'm just going to finish Karmal's story. Fast forward, spoiler alert. Gorbachev in 1986 gets impatient with Karmal. So a lot's been going on in Russia, right? They're not going to be quite as repressive as these old guard Afghani communists had been. And he's forced out, and Najibullah is empowered, and he stays on after the Soviets leave. So the Soviets are going to leave the next year in 1988. leave everything with Najibullah, and he holds on for 4 years, which is a lot. So the Soviets leaving Afghanistan was a little bit more gradual than what happened when we left. And he's also from the Ghilzai tribe. Just over and over again, the Ghilzai sub-Pashtun tribe comes to the fore. So he lasted, but then the feminist we talked about before, Anahita, she said, hey, let Karmal come back to Afghanistan. He left when the Soviets installed you, but he's a good guy. She was a good buddy of Karmal's in the early days of the communist revolution. And Karmal came back and became an associate of a major warlord who overthrew Najibullah, okay? So, whoops. And then all hell breaks loose. The civil war chaos begins when Najibullah is thrown out by Karmal. Karmal can't put together a government again. And so we're going to leave Afghanistan in 1996 in total, 1992 in total chaos. So you're going to have 4 years of civil war from which the Taliban emerges. So when we return to Afghanistan, we'll look at how the Soviets lost and how that then became the ground on which the Taliban movement could emerge. We've got to go and catch up on what's going on the east side of the Durand Line, because Durand Line divides Pashtunistan, and that's an insult to Pashtuns on both sides of the line. You'll remember it was drawn, dictated really by the British in the negotiations with the Russians. Pakistan, when it became a country, accepted it. Afghanistan has never accepted it. So it's relevant, and it's certainly relevant when we talk about the American occupation. Let's go back in time to 1958. In Pakistan, you'll remember it became a country in 1947 when Jinnah insisted that there be a separation of Muslims from Hindus. He wanted his own state. And you'll remember the drama of how this is played out in the movie Gandhi. If you haven't watched Gandhi recently and you want to relive the division of the Indian subcontinent, go back and watch that. Gandhi begged Jinnah, please, let's keep India together. British have melded the state together and ruled it as part of their empire. And as we take it over, let's keep it intact. It didn't exist before the British came, but there it was. And Gandhi wanted to preserve it. But Jinnah said, fearing that Muslims would be a minority, feared their repression and wanted a state of his own, which he got, and which was called Pakistan. And here he is meeting with our next featured politician, Ayub Khan. We're skipping ahead to 1958 when Ayub takes over on the east side of the border. So you'll remember in 1969, Afghanistan is operating as a constitutional monarchy. And Ayub Khan gets all the pleasures of being in the Commonwealth and attends the Prime Minister's Conference of all the Commonwealth countries with Nehru, and gets to stand right behind herself. And then there's a lot of trauma over Kashmir, a lot of fighting over Kashmir. Pakistan gets some aid over in that fight from the United States. You'll remember as part of the Great Game Cold War edition that India sided more with under Nehru with the Soviet Union, and Pakistan sided more with us. Does anybody want to hazard a guess about what Ayub Khan's ethnicity was? Whisper it to yourself. Did you whisper Pashtun? He was Pashtun.
Yes.
Ayub Khan faltered when East Pakistan, now you'll remember with separation, Pakistan was divided into West Pakistan, which is the current Pakistan, but also East Pakistan to absorb all the Muslims in the eastern part of the country, and particularly the Bengali ethnicity. So East Pakistan finally got sick of being bossed around by the Pashtuns in West Pakistan, and they said, screw this. And there was a war in 1971, which West Pakistan lost and Bangladesh was born. And so Ayub Khan lost power. He had presided over a defeat. If you lose half of your country, that's bad. And so he was kicked out. He was succeeded by another general. Ayub Khan had started as a general, as many Pakistani politicians do. He was succeeded by Yahya Khan, who also faltered. Do you know what ethnicity he is? Whisper to yourself. If you said Pashtun, you'd be right. So here we were, two Pashtuns had managed to lose half the country, and the military is looking at an existential situation. They're in disaster mode. Maybe India is going to attack, and we're going to become a state in India. And out of desperation, the military turned to a socialist, a leftist from the Pakistan People's Party. Out of desperation, that he's very popular, he's very charismatic, and the people love him. And so they handed the government to him, handed it to him. And so he's Sindhi. Sindh is just south of the Punjab. He got a BA in political science in 1950. Do you have any idea what school he attended?
University of Wisconsin.
Good guess. It was Berkeley.
Berkeley.
It was Berkeley. He left Berkeley in 1950, and can you imagine after his stay at Berkeley, he was interested in the theories of socialism. And he actually had delivered some lectures on the Berkeley campus on the feasibility of socialism in the Islamic countries. So folks, I'm telling you, why do you read history? It's to stumble on unlikely connections. And this causes my brain to fire dopamine big time. So Bhutto becomes a successful diplomat in the 1960s. He's a socialist, so that they don't figure that he's going to be much of a political threat, but he went to Berkeley, and so let him go talk to Kennedy. And he could do things like that. And he could even, he was suave enough to go and talk to King Zahir, who you remember was still in power in up to the 1973. And so he got married, interestingly enough, to an Iranian Kurdish woman. So this is an interesting combination. And she's known as Begum Nusrat Bhutto. So you'll remember Begum, we talked about that last time when applied to a prominent Muslim woman, just basically means lady, implying royalty. But you don't have to be royal. You just have to be married to someone consequential. And they had a daughter named Benazir, who will come up much later as a prime minister in Pakistan, the first prime minister.
John, it's Carol. Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Can I forget? So was that an arranged marriage?
I don't know. Something to investigate. I'm gonna bet not. But we'll see.
Yeah, because that's a pretty amazing combination of alliances to create.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is the thing. This Indo-European part of the world is more integrated than you might imagine. And I think it's, and I say Indo-European advisedly because it's language. And as I've said before, I don't think it's ethnicity as much as language. And Ramsey said something very similar at his last talk. So I think he and I are on the same wavelength. I'm paying more attention to language, and you're going to see a little bit more when later in today's talk, I think. Okay, so what did Bhutto do? He's got power. And he says, okay, we're going to write a constitution. It's not going to be the one handed down from Jena. It's going to be a people's constitution, a consensus constitution. And he has it, and it gets written, and it involves the emancipation of the downtrodden. The conservatives in the army are in no position to oppose it because they just lost half of their country. So they just say, okay, and Parliament becomes a functioning Parliament where people have a voice. So things change big time under Bhutto, and his legacy still lives on, even though the army's back in charge. But you have a civil society. You do have a journalism, a quote unquote free press, as attenuated as it is, but it's there, and it was started during Bhutto's time. Of course, a lot of journalists get assassinated by the fundamentalists and the jihadists, but they're there, and the fact that they have the courage still to speak out. They have a judicial system that often challenges the army. It's interesting. And they have elections that people can lose. There's a lot of elections in the world that where the governing party can't lose, but the governing party can lose in these elections, and that's the thanks to Bhutto. And then there were some radical changes within the economic sphere. It became more collective and people friendly. But there was civil disorder, and I've alluded to it before, and it involved the Pashtuns and the Baluch leftists who agreed with Bhutto on his program, but still wanted more autonomy for the Pashtuns and the Baluchs. Now, was that ethnicity? Yeah, I suppose, but it was also language. Pashto was invented just to create a Pashtunistan. But so, yeah, there's still a lot of ethnic stuff that goes on, and it's going to lead to Bhutto's fall, because now he no longer can ally with the Pashtuns and the Baluchs in advancing a program that they all agree on politically and socioeconomically. A real tragedy, nationalism. So this is that. I've already alluded to that. This just restating what I just said. All these parties, even the Punjabis, started wanting more autonomy from the central government. They were all empowered when the generals lost East Pakistan. And they're all playing their autonomy independence card now. Now's the time. Finally, though, Bhutto says, hey, this whole thing is falling apart. I've got to make a choice. And he made a choice. He went with the military and the intelligence agencies to keep Pakistan a country. Because all this stuff, all these guys wanted more autonomy and even maybe independence. And so he said, okay, I'm Sind. I'm going to go with the military. A lot of the military was Pashtun, by the way. So the Pashtuns are playing a double game. In a lot of instances. Some Pashtuns work for the state, some Pashtuns, mostly in Pakhtunkhwa, in the old Northwest province, they're still rabid nationalists, but not so much the Pashtuns that have become part of the establishment. So it's a complicated question. And there's one abbreviation you have to memorize. ISI is the Intelligence Services, the Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI. That abbreviation is going to come up, especially during the American occupation. So there's a lot of words here, but essentially Bhutto starts doing counter Pashtun politics, and at first it's just taking care of his own Pashtuns on the Durand line. So the closer you live the Durand line, the more you want to hearken for Pashtunistan. So he gets involved there, suppressing that, but then he starts dabbling on the other side, on the Afghanistan side of the line, and providing safe havens for people that were against the Pashtuns that were against the a more modernist socialist government. So maybe he even supported the communists who were going to overthrow Daoud. So he was doing everything he could to weaken Afghanistan, because it seemed like Afghanistan under Daoud was doing everything he could to weaken Pakistan so they could remove the Durand line. So it's complicated. And then we start getting names familiar to the 21st century. Rabbani, Hekmatyar, who is right now interior minister for the Taliban, and Masood, a very charismatic Tajik rebel leader who bin Laden assassinated the day before 9/11 because he knew there was going to be chaos in Afghanistan, and he didn't want this Tajik controlling the way things were going to unfold. And so Bhutto starts training Afghani mujahideen that were against the leftists. So already you see this strange interaction between religion and social policy. And Masood and Hekmatyar tried to beat the communists to the punch, but they staged an uprising in 1978, 3 years before the communists would try, obviously from different directions. They didn't like Daoud because he was too modern, and from the other direction, the communists, because he wasn't modern enough. He wasn't going all the way with communism. So at this point, both Daoud and Bhutto are in trouble. They know it. They meet. They have successful state visits, and they're about ready to come up with a final agreement on the Durand line, and they're both thrown out of office, both of them. We know Daoud gets assassinated, and something bad's going to happen to Bhutto too. Why did Bhutto, though, before we get to what bad's going to happen to Bhutto, why did he support Afghani Islamists? Just to review, he didn't like the Communist Party and how it was seemed to be rising in Afghanistan, and that was a well-founded fear, because that's exactly what happened. We've already mentioned his anti-nationalist autonomy policies of the Baluchs. But in foreign policy, just like Daoud dabbled in foreign policy and got involved in the great game, the Cold War edition. And the Islamists had opposed both American dabbling and Soviet dabbling. So he kind of liked them because hey, they'd be for an independent Pakistan, and that's what all Pakistanis were wondering, whether there was still going to be an independent Pakistan. And the Islamists said yes, that's what they wanted, and they had opposed losing the East. And then there's this thing about Pakistan and its identity. Jinnah proclaimed it an Islamic state, and by gosh, who's going to support Pakistan remaining an Islamic state but the Islamists, and including Afghani Islamists, and you get an echo of that with the Taliban today. That's why the Pakistan and with its Islamic identity, like the Taliban, because Pakistan's global claim to fame is they're the Islamic State, the first one. And well, that's not right. But the Taliban today is like that. So here's what happens, though, that triggers Bhutto. Bhutto is going to be executed. Yep. Sad story for a Berkeley alum. But he is going to be executed. And where do things go wrong? A lot of words here. I'm sorry for this. But India goes nuclear. And the fear is that Pakistan might go nuclear. And that's a bridge too far for Kissinger, who threatens Bhutto and says, stop your investigation into nuclear weapons. We'll make a horrible example of you. And just like Daoud, who didn't submit to Brezhnev's threatening, Bhutto doesn't respond to Kissinger's threat. And then he plays his Soviet card. But in doing that, he turns on the left big time, on the Awami League and the Pashtuns. That's on the border of the Durand line, the leftist, the nationalist party. And he needed them. He needed the support of the Pashtuns and the Baluchs. But he made his choice. They're too nationalistic. I'm throwing them overboard. To survive, I've got to get rid of these guys, even though they agreed with his ideology. But also Bhutto made some mistakes and suppressed the Muslim League on the right. So by that time, he lost administrative control over Lahore, and the military said, that's enough. They arrested Bhutto. They allowed him 6 years before to try to put Pakistan, West Pakistan together and preserve it as a nation. He'd done that. He'd achieved a new constitution. He'd achieved social justice. But it was the nationalism that he was forced to intercede against. So it was the separatists that was his undoing. He wasn't done. He was arrested. He was released, and he went on a speaking tour. And the guy that overthrew him is Zia, and he watches Bhutto leave jail and go and speak all around the country to adoring crowds who had benefited from his constitution, who had been allowed to have a say, who had voted. And Bhutto was supposed to make a huge speech and have his largest crowd ever. But in assembling, there was some disorder among the crowd. Zia was looking for a pretext. And so he arrests Bhutto to protect him from the masses for his own safety. But 2 years later, he executes him for quote unquote abuse of power. An event that echoes in Pakistan as a hashtag, even today, that the schism between the establishment that liked what Bhutto did and the military that saw what he did as a threat. And unfortunately, Bhutto, in order to keep Pakistan together, had to turn on his natural political allies of the left. So he lost, there was just no way to thread that needle. And so he was hung and there's the headline. Taken out, buried in the family graveyard. Now his daughter is going to come back. There's enough sympathy for Bhutto and what he tried to do that she can later succeed. What did Afghanistan do? They retaliated. They, obviously, this is 1979, and the communists are in control. They just lost a guy they think they can work with. Remember, Bhutto had turned to the Soviet Union, and they hosted some of the surviving members of Bhutto's party, who were going to create a militia and try to terrorize Zia. That didn't work out. So we've got a few minutes left. We had a question last week on can Afghanistan succeed? And I said I'd review this, and I'm going to do it really, really quick, but you'll see this. This is not the last time you'll see this. You need a scorecard, and there are so many variables and factors pushing on Afghanistan unity. And I put the Pashtuns at the middle of it. Most of the Taliban are Pashtuns. So off we go. The first stage of civilization is the warlords. You had Pashtun tribes doing that, but they can't unite. There's too many mountains and separate valleys. Nobody can impose order, governance from a center. First, the warlords look for legitimacy. They first found it in Buddhism, possibly Zoroastrianism. Ultimately, it's going to be in Islam, and part of that being of an Abrahamic religion, as is Judaism and Christianity. There was some myth that they were a lost tribe, a Semitic lost tribe. But in the early days, they were mostly Sufis and involved in trade more than radical religion. At some point, you got your religion, but you've got to have some rules to operate a functioning society, particularly in trade. And so they turned to their own code, their own tribal code, Pashtunwali, which is alive and well today. And that has gotten in the way of creating a nation. But all this is based on some consent and agreement of what the rules are beyond religious dictates. Then start the external influences. Here are the people that have all affected the evolution of a Pashtun society. We've been through all of them. And then there are just frank invaders that upset the apple cart. The Persians, a couple of waves of Persians. Finally, the Tajiks and Mongols and the blended together to form the Mughals. They first controlled Kabul, and Babar went down then and started the Mughals. And you'll remember Babar's buried in Kabul, where he was warlord for a long time before he headed south. Also, Uzbeks, we're going to hear more about them. The Punjab, we spent a lot of time talking about the Sikhs, the Russians, the Brits, and the Americans. So the Europeans as well. And the reformers have gotten involved, and we see Wahhabis have always influenced events in Afghanistan starting in the 1750s. The Sikhs, of course, hoped that their religion would spread to Afghanistan, but it didn't get any further than Peshawar. The Sassanians had hoped to introduce Christianity, and the Marathas had ambitions to bring Hinduism north. And then the second wave of the Persians is the Shia, the Safavids. And then finally, we've learned about the Deobandi sect located in northern India that was a sect of Islam formed really to defend the Mughals against the British. And they easily transferred their dislike of Europeans to Americans. And they have worked with the Wahhabis together. So I call them the reformer. And then other ideas, democracy from America, socialism from the Soviet Union, the extreme form of Sharia introduced by the Wahhabis, and then the notion of a global caliphate that we get with ISIS these days. And there are people being killed in Afghanistan today in the fight over should there be a global caliphate or should there just be a local Taliban or global ISIS, the Wahhabis. And then the final list of influences. A lot of people have coveted the Khyber Pass. It's land, it's an opening to the two river civilizations and all the wealth that they produce, the Indus and the Ganges, self-interest of the Russians, the Chinese. During the American occupation, you'll finally see China use American police protection and make a big play in Afghanistan, needless to say, Pakistan and India. And all of these factors, I've divided them into 8 sectors, but they obviously all overlap and interact. So the answer to Irene's question is very, very complicated. And what factors are at play at the moment you ask the question? But all these have been, in one way or another, divisive of setting up a nation state. And when we come back, and I guess it's going to be on the 28th, we've cleared the calendar to be available on the 28th. This is going to be a good place to start. We'll talk about the Soviet Union and their occupation, what their motives were, what was the background to that. So I'm going to stop sharing unless there's anybody have a question about a slide that I should go back to, or can I stop the share of the map? Hearing no objection. Now I can see everybody.
That last analysis was fantastic.
It really was. And I have to say, all of the background about the interplay between Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, that helped me enormously to understand what's going on in that part of the world in a distinct way. And that is my alarm saying that I have to leave. Thank you so much, John. talk to you all later.
Okay, see you on the 28th.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna.
How's babysitting? Are you